I can remember some people who had 15, 16, 17, 18 DWIs.
Wow.
Now after the fourth one is a felony.
Driving under the influence of alcohol can have serious consequences. Today, we'll take a look at what laws are in place to prevent repeat offenders and how bartenders help people make the right choice before getting behind the wheel. Plus,
we're a very close family, and this has just actually devastated us more than we can tell you. It's just so overwhelming and incomprehensible that we've lost Austin.
Plus, we'll introduce you to a family who says their lives are forever changed because of a drunk driver. Stay tuned to Drunk Driving, Broken Lives, Shattered Dreams, Austin Melville, A Life Interrupted. Thanks for joining us. I'm Annalise Schmittel.
And I'm Matt Prink. Today's show is called Drunk Driving, Broken Lives, Shattered Dreams, Austin Melville, A Life Interrupted. We'll take a closer look at drunk driving and how serious of a problem it is across the country.
And we'll introduce you to the Melville family, who has an important message to share with everyone who's considering getting behind the wheel after drinking. According to Mothers Against Drunk Driving, more than 10,000 people will die this year in drunk driving-related crashes. That's one person every 50 minutes.
Matt also reports 1 in 3 people will be involved in an alcohol-related crash in their lifetime. Those numbers are frightening for many of us.
Today, we'll give you an inside look on what the roads are really like on the weekends in Winona County and how bartenders are being trained to spot who might has had too much to drink and shouldn't drive.
Later, we'll talk with 2 people who enforce drunk driving laws and find out what new laws have been put in place to deter driving while intoxicated. And finally, we'll sit down with the family of Austin Melville, a man who passed away in November and inspired this show. 1 in 7 Minnesota drivers has a DWI. There were nearly 4,000 alcohol-related accidents in the state of Minnesota in 2009. To put this in perspective, we sent Larissa Olson on a ride-along with a Winona County Sheriff deputy to get a look inside.
For officers who patrol these streets on the weekends, drunk drivers are just a part of their job. But for me, it was a chance to see how safe or how dangerous our roads really are.
We started at 8:30 at night, and by 9 we had our first person pulled over. Luckily for him and everyone else on the road, he was not driving drunk.
On average, every 11th or 12th stop, usually there's at least one person that I arrest for drunk driving.
Winona County Deputy Chad Myers has mixed feelings on the subject.
I am surprised being the number of repeat offenders that I've come in contact with. At the same time, I'm not surprised because, again, this is kind of a new age thing now, a new generation of DWIs.
Then around 11, we got a call that someone was driving on the wrong side of the road, something Deputy Myers says is a clear sign of drunk driving.
We look for certain things like inconsistent speeds, braking at odd times. A lot of times they're so worried about driving the speed limit that they're braking up a hill and when they're going well under the speed limit. You look at the way they drive around corners. I know I've followed a lot of people that they drive straight just fine when they're drunk, but when they go to negotiate a corner, again with the alcohol being a depressant, it slows the reaction time.
Deputy Myers says this woman had been drinking, but her blood alcohol content, or BAC, was 0.05. This is below the legal limit of 0.08.
There are 3 standardized tests that are recognized. The first one is the horizontal gaze nystagmus test. What that is, horizontal gaze is involuntary jerking of the eyes. The second field sobriety test is a walk and turn. Take 9 steps down, 9 steps back. And then the last one we do is the one-legged stand. They stand on one leg. And then the last test that we do is obviously the preliminary breath, the roadside breath test.
Around 2:30, we saw a car swerving. This is one of the main signs of impaired driving. Deputy Myers says alcohol can affect the body in different ways.
Again, alcohol is a CNS depressant. What it does is it kind of slows down reaction time. It impairs your judgment, impairs your vision. Again, we went back and we talked about the weaving or the swerving.
The driver was pulled over, and Myers says he smelled alcohol when he approached the vehicle. Field sobriety tests were given. Meyer says this woman blew a .20. She was taken to jail. After refusing to take an official breath test at the station, she was put in a cell.
As far as the breath test itself, it depends on what level of drunk DWI that they're going to be charged with, determines whether they're going to stay the night and have a first appearance at the next available court date, or whether they're going to be released and asked to return on their own recognizance to appear for court.
After finding a sober driver, she was released. As a result of her actions, her license has been revoked for a year. Meyer says she is awaiting trial on a third-degree refusal to take the test and a fourth-degree DWI.
In Minnesota, bartenders are not licensed. However, there are training programs to teach bartenders how to serve responsibly. Brandon Harris, a bartender for 6 years, says he went through a training program that's focused on checking IDs, the signs of someone who might be intoxicated, and how to handle the situation.
It's an everyday battle, basically. You're gonna have to deal with drunk people every day, so we always offer to call a cab. That's never a problem, and we're more happy to do that than to just watch them walk out and have no idea what they're doing. But yeah, definitely always willing to use let them use our phones. I've had someone use my cell phone before, so you do what you can to assist them any way possible.
Harris says as a bartender, he feels it's his job to make sure people get home safely. He says something as simple as calling a cab can make this happen.
More than 3.3 million college students drove under the influence of alcohol in 2005, according to one study. Do college students today really know when to turn over their keys? We went around Winona State University's campus and asked students how many drinks they thought they could have before getting behind the wheel.
I would say you have to know yourself. I would say you have to know what's too far and at the point of which you lose self-control.
I would say like 3 is too many to drink and drive. Yeah.
I think it's really not wise to consume any and then expect to be able to drive yourself home later.
I think 0, or like you shouldn't take any to drive.
I would say like 2 or 3.
Probably about 3 or so, like 3.
I think that honestly anything past 1. Actually, I think drinking and driving is bad, period. So
about 2 or 3.
Any. I don't think you should drink and drive even if you have just like 1 drink. I don't care if you're over 21. I just don't think you should.
I would say anything past 1.
I'm going to say that having any drinks is too many to get behind the wheel. I think it's just not worth it by any means, and especially if you're underage, which, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know, being in college, you see that a lot, underage drinking, and just the repercussions I think people need to know about what exactly happens when you decide to drink and drive, and that it's actually really easy to get caught. So I think any drinks and getting behind the wheel is not a good idea, because generally people have a higher blood alcohol content than they actually realize.
The same study found that almost 2,000 deaths of 18 to 24-year-olds in 2005 were unintentionally alcohol related. Coming up, we hear from a Winona County deputy who patrols the streets and a district attorney who prosecutes DWI cases. Find out how a new law could be making it tougher on repeat offenders.
Plus, police say Austin Melville was struck and killed by a drunk driver in downtown Rochester. He was a recent Winona State graduate from the Mass Communication Department. Coming up later in our show, his professors, friends, and students remember his life. Welcome back to A Life Interrupted. In 2010, it became law in Minnesota that those convicted of their 4th DWI must install a breathalyzer in their car, or they will be prohibited from driving.
Olga Letepakova is here now with 2 people who help keep our roads safe.
Winona County Deputy Chad Myers and Winona County Attorney Karen Sonneman have a first-hand look at the severity of drunk driving in Winona County. They're here with us to talk about laws in place to deter driving under the influence and how the prosecution process goes. Thank you so much for being here. The first question I have for you both actually is, how common is drinking and driving here in Winona?
Actually, it's quite a bit, being that Winona has 3 colleges, obviously, with the college students, both of age and underage. The drinking, I believe, is probably higher than what you would say in some areas where they don't have the colleges like they do here. I think it's more prevalent within the city limits as it is probably in the county, at least in my opinion, just obviously because of the higher population of people.
And how many people do you usually, Karen, how many people do you usually prosecute
Our
a
office,
month?
our office
or so?
prosecutes on average about 200 cases a year, so what, a little less than 20 a month.
20 a month.
So,
And how about, how many people do you see on the road that are under the influence?
I would probably say that the numbers probably are pretty close to what Corinne said, as far as about 200. Obviously, anyone that's 08 or over is going to be arrested and prosecuted, and that also includes people not necessarily under the influence of alcohol, but also the influence of hazardous or controlled substances such as drugs, such as marijuana. The big thing now that I think we're coming across is the plant food, the methadone that people are using. And unfortunately, the laws are a little bit behind as far as prosecuting for that, because it isn't considered a scheduled drug yet.
Not yet. When you look for drunk drivers, is there a specific time of day that you see most of them on the road?
Usually the weekends at night.
The weekends.
But I call it, what I consider the hot time is between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock at night. Friday nights, Saturday nights, and I mean, you can even go into Thursday. But it doesn't matter if it's a weekend or not. Unfortunately, they're out there. I've worked many different shifts. I've come across them on Tuesday nights, I've come across them on Wednesday nights, I've come across them on Sunday nights. It's more prevalent, obviously, in the weekends during the 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. hours, but it's nonstop. They're always out there regardless of date or time.
And what signs do you see that you know that this is possibly a drunk driver?
Well, the big thing would be the driving conduct. If you pull behind someone and they're weaving in the lane, they're crossing the center line. Obviously, with alcohol, their reactions are diminished. They may come up to a stop sign and have to stop at the very last second. Certain things, failure to use their turning signal. Those are the big things we look for to kind of build our probable cause to pull a vehicle over. Now, once the vehicle's pulled over, we walk up. Obviously, the odor of the alcohol is going to raise a red flag for us right away. And then just the basic conversation: is their speech slurred? Do they have the bloodshot, watery eyes? When they're trying to gather their information, such as their license or their insurance card, are they having a hard time with it? Are they fumbling with it? So that, again, that builds our probable cause to get the person out of the vehicle to take steps further to go into the field sobriety testing on the roadside.
Karen, I read actually that drunk drivers are being pulled over a few times, and they actually drive as well after their license been revoked. What does it say about our laws, and are they tough enough?
well, I think actually our laws have been getting tougher, which is good. About, oh gosh, how long ago was it, Chad? I think maybe 5 years ago we went to a felony DWI, which captured a lot of people who were driving under the influence multiple times but weren't getting punished. They kept going back, and I can remember some people who had 15, 16, 17, 18 DWIs. Wow. Now after the fourth one is a felony, and there are more people going to prison for DWIs now. And then the change from 0.10 to 0.08 was another big change to really try to capture more people driving drunk. So I think the laws have changed in a positive way to get more drunk drivers off the road.
And they're having the law now effective of July 1st about, it used to be 0.20 or more as an aggravating factor. Come July 1st now, because the 0.20 or more was when the law was 0.10. Now that's dropped back to 0.08. Now they're working at trying to get that back to twice the legal limit, so 0.16 instead of 0.20. So there are laws in place, and I think the state is trying to do things to punish these people that are multiple offenders and try to cut down on that recidivism.
Chad, how did your personal experience have changed the way you patrol?
Well, I had a friend in 2005, November 2005, that was killed as a result of drunk driving. A close friend of mine, and I got to see firsthand what the family went through, particularly his mother and father. And we were such a close-knit group of friends at that time when that happened. And I think because of that experience, I don't want to have to see another family go through, whether it's the person that's driving or the person or the other people on the road, because I mean, those of us that are obeying the laws and not going out drinking and driving, we have a right to know that we're safe on the roads. So
Sure.
I feel somewhat of an obligation to try to make sure that the best I can to make sure that doesn't happen to any other family, at least in this area.
I guess next question for both of you. Is there any legislation in the works that will help prosecute drunk drivers and drivers under the influence in general?
For a couple years now, they've been trying to get the interlock, the ignition lock, which would keep people who have, I mean, one of the problems with keeping people off the road who are drunk drivers is that they can get into any vehicle. If you take their car away, if you take their license away, they're going to drive. And so there's been this push of getting a interlock system where people would have to blow into the car to get it actually started. And that has hit some roadblocks because of the cost, but that I think is coming with the better technology that we have to try to, because the chronic drunk driver is going to try to drive regardless. So, you can lock them up. They're going to be back on the road once they get done with their sentence, and unless they get treatment, they're...
And obviously, if that person's been arrested 3, 4, 5 times, they're not going to care if they get arrested one more time. Their license is canceled, and at that point, I don't think it necessarily deters that chronic drink or that chronic drunk driver. What it does is every time they get arrested, they try to think of a better way to try to outsmart law enforcement. Unfortunately, they don't take it as a learning experience at all. So that's unfortunate.
And you've already talked about the fact that driving under the influence is not just alcohol related anymore.
Right.
And is there any legislation in order to include marijuana and synthetic drugs as
well, marijuana is already
it's already
on
in
the
place.
books. The synthetic drugs, as Chad was saying, the law isn't it's lagging behind. Some of those drugs, the plant foods, K2, now K3, I've heard.
Spice.
They're Drug Enforcement Administration prohibited on the federal level, but it's getting the laws to conform here. There's, I think, there was a recent article about the Board of Pharmacy in the state that is kind of trying to keep ahead of that and placing for Minnesota those synthetic drugs on their list as prohibited substances. So we might be able to get something there, but the legislature is aware of that.
It's a matter of time, unfortunately. It's just it's going to take a little time, but eventually it's going to get there. So.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful news to hear. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you.
Thanks, Olga. Coming up, we'll take a closer look at a Rochester case that involved a drunk driver, which captured statewide headlines. The driver is behind bars, and we'll have the latest on the investigation. Plus, we'll hear from the survivors of the accident. Stay tuned. Austin Melville was a recent mass communications graduate of the Winona State University. According to police reports, on November 27, 2010, Austin's life was taken from him by a drunk driver. Austin and his two friends, Chris Glensky and Don Richardson, were walking on a sidewalk downtown Rochester when a moving vehicle approached them from behind, wiping Chris and Austin off their feet.
It started out like any other typical night. 3 friends were heading downtown Rochester to socialize. The night took an unexpected turn. Austin Melville, Don Richardson, and Chris Glensky were about to cross the crosswalk on South Broadway when Richardson says, out of nowhere, a car came right towards them.
I see out of the corner of my eye just headlights or something like that coming from south to north. The car was traveling. And so I believe I said something like, hey guys, let's move.
Don says he was able to jump to the curb, but Austin and Chris weren't so lucky.
I jumped to the curb, turned around and saw Chris get run over and Austin flying through the air.
Chris says he was conscious the entire time, but unable to move.
I flew forward 15 to 20 feet, and Austin went 50 to 75, somewhere in that range. I mean, I just landed in the gutter, and Austin landed, he hit like a signpost or a cement thing, like flower pot or something, and landed on the sidewalk really far down the street.
Both Austin and Chris were rushed to St. Mary's Hospital. Don says he was unaware of both of their conditions.
Pretty much like a minute or two later, he's off in the ambulance, going only a couple blocks to St. Mary's. So they did everything that they could as quick as they could.
Don says calling Austin's parents was something he knew he needed to find the strength to do.
I called up Sandy, Austin's mother, and let her know. I didn't really know what was going on with Austin quite then yet, but I knew that he was the worst out of the two.
After Austin's family was reached and on the way to the hospital, there was one more person to call, Austin's longtime girlfriend, Katie Nord.
Definitely not like him. You know, I would at least hear from him by 11:30 midnight saying, hey, we're just heading back now, I'll call you in a little bit.
Katie tried calling Don and Austin's parents to see why she couldn't reach him.
I always expect the worst. So I didn't even expect to get the phone call saying he's in the hospital, broken bones or whatever. I just expected, this was it.
It wasn't until 6 hours later Katie found out Austin had died.
I knew something was wrong by 3 o'clock, and that I actually had wanted to get in the car and come down here to find out what was going on, but he was gone by midnight.
Don, Chris, and Katie will always remember Austin as a happy person. They only hope one day the details of that night will erase from their memory.
Thank you, Olga. 33-year-old Christopher Troutman is facing 23 charges in connection with his fatal hit and run. Police say on November 27th, he drove drunk in downtown Rochester, hitting 4 innocent people, killing one of them. Troutman was arrested shortly after the incident. Amanda Armstrong has more on the investigation.
Mark Ostrom has been the Olmsted County Attorney for 4 years, but he says he's still working on finding a balance between being invested in a case and being too emotionally involved, especially in a case like Austin Melville's.
That's really troubling because we have obviously a loss of life here and 3 other people that were very significantly hurt, and some pretty egregious driving conduct and behavior. So it's hard to not be emotionally upset about the facts of this case, but you got to maintain a distance.
Police say 32-year-old Christopher Troutman was driving drunk the night he struck 4 people in downtown Rochester, killing Melville. Police say they were all rushed to the local hospital. According to the criminal complaint, Troutman had dinner and a few drinks with a female friend before going to 2 more bars in Rochester. The companion stated Troutman was, quote, very intoxicated and suggested to call a cab because he might not be able to drive. The complaint states Troutman was driving with drugs in his system, a BAC of .189, and driving between 45 and 50 miles per hour in downtown Rochester before hitting all 4 victims.
Drinking, driving, having these other substances in his body, driving exceptionally fast in kind of a road rage type of mentality, all this stuff led to the enhanced charges.
Troutman was originally charged with criminal vehicular homicide. Ostrom says evidence submitted in a recent hearing showed Troutman's BAC was even higher than originally reported, at a .21. And he sped up to hit 2 more victims after hitting Austin and his friend.
Not only was he traveling at a high rate of speed when he hit the first two victims, but he actually sped up significantly after hitting the first two before he hit the second two. So it evinces kind of very significant conduct that was eminently dangerous.
New charges include 4 counts of criminal vehicular homicide or operation with a blood alcohol concentration of .08 or more. They also include counts of criminal vehicular homicide or operation under the influence of a combination of alcohol and controlled substances. Also added was a single count of third-degree murder, perpetuating an imminently dangerous act while evincing a depraved mind.
That was a very significant factor for us in treating this as more than just a criminal vehicular homicide. This is in fact intentional conduct that resulted in a death, so significantly different.
Troutman has a criminal record, including 1 DWI. That charge was more than 10 years ago. Austin says it will not have an impact on this case.
The DWI is what we call an enhanceable offense if it occurred within 10 years. But in this particular case, his prior DWI occurred outside that 10-year window. So it's not an enhancer for purposes of the new charges.
His next court date is May 31st. No trial date is set yet.
This is a particularly bad case, and so to the extent that we have the ability to ask for an enhanced penalty, we're certainly going to try.
Several phone calls to Troutman's attorney were not returned.
Austin had a bright future ahead of him. He graduated in 2010 from Winona State University. His major was in mass communication with an emphasis in broadcasting and a minor in coaching. And as Nate Seams found out, he was able to combine these two passions into one.
If I had the opportunity, I would have liked to have him as my son.
Dr. Ajit Daniel got to know Austin Melville in the fall of 2008. Melville took several classes from Dr. Daniel. He says Austin was the kind of student that would go far in the broadcast business.
He wanted to learn, he wanted to know things, he wanted to communicate.
Besides going to class, Austin was also actively involved in campus activities.
He got involved into SBS things by just getting things done, making himself involved, contributing to the various things on our agenda.
There's something called the Midwest Journalism Conference. It's in the cities every year, and I'll never forget it. He was one of the first guys to come out with us, and there was about 12 girls. And Austin's pretty quiet in nature, and then you put him around 12 girls, and he hardly said anything.
WSU mass communication professor Robin O'Callahan was not only his teacher, but advisor as well.
So I guess when I think about Austin, I think about him in the back of the classroom with his Green Bay Packer hat on, and it's really low, and you could hardly see his eyes. And I always wondered, you know, gosh, is he listening? Is he paying attention? Is he getting what I'm saying? And his work just showed me that he was paying attention 110%.
Austin proved he had a firm grasp on the content. His senior year, he was the recipient of the Broadcast Scholarship for having the highest GPA in the broadcast option.
You know, his work was high-quality work. And so
all signs pointed to Austin becoming a success in his chosen field.
about 2 weeks before he passed away, he had sent me a Facebook message and was interviewing for the Minnesota Twins.
We will never know where Austin's career would have led him, but both Dr. Daniel and Professor O'Callahan agree he could have gone far in an industry he had such passion for.
He was firm, polite, and gentle, just like a Green Bay Packer.
Now that you know about the night that Austin died and his relationship with his college professors, we wanted to take a closer look at how his death has affected those closest to him. Austin's parents are in the studio with us when we return. It's clear Austin was a great student with a bright future ahead of him, but he was also very close with his parents, and the night he was struck didn't just end his life, it forever changed the lives of his parents and family who survived him. Olga is in the studio with Sandy and Hill Melville with more.
It was a Friday night, the day after Thanksgiving, when Sandy and Hill Melville got the call no parents ever want to receive. Their son Austin was hit by a car in Rochester. When they reached the hospital, they had no idea what to expect. By the time doctors was able to talk to them, it was too late. He was already gone. Joining me today are Austin's parents, Hill and Sandy. Thank you so much for being here and for helping us tell Austin's story. I was always wondering, what was Austin like as a child?
Austin was absolutely a joy. He was happy. He was wanting to please people, eager to please. He sang songs, danced around. He was interested in everything. He had a natural curiosity. Just a really fun person to be with.
And yeah, he was very easy to deal with. And when something would catch his interest, he'd really dive into it. Even like when he was in first grade, he could tell you all about all the planets because that was something he was interested in. And he kept that through his whole life. Different things would interest him. He would become very deeply involved in them, and he was an interesting person to be around.
Do you have a favorite memory of Austin that you could share with us?
There's a lot of memories, and it's hard to pick out just one. One that stands out in my mind is one Saturday he wanted to know where the car creeper was that his dad had to slide under cars, and so he went out and asked his dad on the deck where it was. And I heard him doing this, and Austin went back into the garage, and I went out and asked Hill, what's he going to do? And Hill said, I don't know. And so I went out to the garage to find out, and Austin was climbing up on the shelf. And I asked him what he was going to do, and he decided he was going to luge down our driveway. We've got a steep, sharp driveway that goes right to the road, and he saw the panic, the horror on my face and the panic, and he said, don't worry, Mom, I'm going to use rollerblades on my hands for brakes. So he was always interested in everything, wanted to try everything, and was curious about everything.
What about you?
There are so many memories of Austin, they're all good, but I just, thought of one just now that when he was graduating from high school and he was going to need a car for college, we went up to look at a car and we're taking it out on a test drive. And he told me he really liked that car. And I said, well, what did you really like about it? He said, it's got radio buttons on the steering wheel. And so he liked listening to music and was interested in radio, and he could control it without ever having to take his hands off the steering wheel. So just, he's just an interesting kid.
I knew Austin pretty well myself, and I know he was a diehard fan of the Packers. It was, a big part of his life. This is more probably a question to you than Cindy. Why Packers? What did he like about the team so much that made him, be his diehard fan?
Well, I'm a Packer fan, and pretty avid myself, and he was right at about the age, 3rd grade, 4th grade, that kids really start to get interested in football when the Packers won the Super Bowl. And so of course he watched every instance of that, and he was hooked at that point that he became a really avid Packer fan, and he followed everything they did. We went to training camp every year and watched several different practices, stayed for a few days, and it was some of the best times we had.
Could you tell us a little bit about what Packers have done for Austin?
Well, actually, one of the reasons that Austin went to college for mass communications broadcasting is because his real goal was to be a broadcaster for the Packers. And he had an application in there. They acknowledged that they had it, but of course their broadcasting is pretty hard to come by. But Packers were very important to him, and actually we got a letter from the Packers after the accident with condolences. They recognized what a fan he was, and they sent a letter to us with their condolences and appreciating how much he'd been a fan of theirs.
Throughout his life, or both of your kids actually, Robin and Austin, you have educated them on everything and effects of especially drinking and driving, as most parents do. How have this accident changed you as a family?
It's totally devastated our family. We have been a very close family, And as you said, you know, we've educated the kids and we've taught them responsibility, and we've taught them that the choices that they make have consequences, and to think of what consequences each choice is. And they were very careful. If they were going to be out late at night, they would be off the roads before the bars closed. They would let us know when they got to their destination. And like I said, we were a very close family, and this has just actually devastated us more than we can tell you. It's just so overwhelming and incomprehensible that we've lost Austin. He was just the best friend to all of us.
And the night he was killed, he was with friends. They had a designated driver. They did everything right. It was nothing that you could say, well, Austin, you shouldn't have done this, because it wasn't anything that he was doing. And Sandy said different times that she's warned our daughter about being careful to cross the street because of the college she goes to. There's a lot of drinking activity going on down there, but she didn't say it to Austin. He was pretty careful anyway, and he was just at home in Rochester, and we didn't, you know, it caught us by surprise like it would anybody.
And he made no mistakes that night. He wasn't doing anything risky. He wasn't out on the highways. He wasn't driving. He was crossing the street in a crosswalk of a safe city. And that was his fatal mistake, is assuming you could cross the street in Rochester.
I know it must be difficult for you, but is there a way we could go back to that night? And can you just tell us a little bit more about the night of the accident and kind of guide us through the night?
Well, it was, Austin was staying over at her friend's that night, so we didn't expect him to come home. In fact, at about 11:30, quarter to 12, I was going to put the dogs out, and Sandy said something about leave the door unlocked because Austin's not home. I said, well, but he's not coming home tonight, so we locked it. Went up, and I had just gotten into bed. Sandy was still getting ready for bed, and the phone rang, and she saw that it was Austin's friend Don, so she picked it up right away, and I couldn't hear the other end of the conversation, but I heard her say, what? And Don had told her that Austin had just been hit by a car. So Sandy can tell you more about that. She was on the phone, but we got in the car right away to get to St. Mary's. I'll let
Don had said he'd gotten hit by a car, and you know, we assumed he was just at Don's house, had no idea that they had gone downtown. And I asked him where they were, and he told me the streets they were at, and I had thought maybe they were goofing around and running across the street, and you know, a car came and hit him, and you know, assumed maybe Austin had a broken leg or banged up or bruises. And as I'm talking to Don and asking him questions, you could hear the sirens in the background, and at that point we knew how, you know, urgent it was, so we took off for St. Mary's Hospital. And 15 minutes away, we pull into St. Mary's, and I run in, and they take insurance information from us and usher us back to a family waiting area. And it was a secluded area, and nobody would tell us anything. They said this was their standard procedure and not to worry. And after waiting for about 40 minutes, the doctor and the emergency staff and the chaplain all came in and said, we're so sorry. And I assumed they were apologizing for making us wait that long, and that's all that was in my head. And then they said we're unable to revive him. And we just were in total shock, just utterly speechless. We didn't have any inkling. We didn't have a clue, and they were unable to revive him, and we had to call his sister at that point to have her come down there to find out she lost her only brother that she was terribly close to. So.
How about the guy who hit Austin? What is going on there? Do you know?
Well, we probably shouldn't say too much about him, but he is still in jail awaiting trial.
Is there any sentencing do you know about the sentencing at all?
The Minnesota guidelines, it's actually sentencing that favors the criminals. It's a light sentence, but there are some issues that have just come up and some changes, and so it might be a little bit different. I mean, we found out some things just in the last week that actually have given us a little more faith in the justice system, that it might be a little bit stricter or more tougher of a sentence for him.
He's currently charged with criminal vehicular homicide. So, and he has, the complaint against him was 14 different charges because Austin wasn't the only person that he hit while he was down there. So there's a lot pending for that person.
If you could say one thing to a person who's considering, you know, drinking and then getting behind the wheel and going out there, what would you say to them?
I would say think twice. Think about what this action is going to cause, what you could do to somebody, and where it will lead you. You wouldn't hand a gun to a drunk person. Getting into a 2,000-pound car and driving down the road is just a murder weapon in itself. Austin was murdered by a person that chose to drink and use his car to kill him.
I just say don't. I mean, you put yourself at risk, but it's not just you. I mean, it could be, you're putting everybody else on the road. Might be one of your friends, might be one of your relatives, an aunt or an uncle, might be one of your parents or a brother or sister. It could be your child, and that's the worst of all.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
It's so heartbreaking to hear Sandy and Hill talk about Austin's life. Since Austin's death, they've become deeply involved in the MAD organization in Olmsted County. They've donated enough money to allow the police department to purchase an extra breathalyzer to use and hopefully curb the high rates of DWI arrests in Minnesota and Olmsted County.
According to Mothers Against Drunk Driving, 1 in 7 Minnesota drivers has a DWI on their record. And the Department of Public Safety says Olmsted County is one of 13 counties in the state that makes up more than half of the state's deaths and serious injuries caused by motorists driving while intoxicated. Hopefully all of you will think twice before getting behind the wheel, even after having just one drink. And I actually remember the day that Austin came to Winona State here. I was obviously a couple years older, and he was so reserved at first, but right away when you got to know him, he opened up and you could just see his passion. I was also a coaching minor. We had a lot of classes together. A really reserved guy, you know, we were on the radio together. You know, we always kind of butted heads a little bit, but we always, you know, respected him. He loved his Packers, one of the passionate Packer fans, and you know, it was so great to see the Packers win this year because, you know, in the end, I knew that they did it for Austin. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. And before we go, we leave you with a series of interviews from Austin's friends and family.
We asked each one of them to describe Austin in 2 words. Here is how they remember him.
Austin was dedicated and quiet. Those are 2 words that come to mind when I think of Austin.
2 words when I think of Austin, it's more of a phrase actually, just a sports fanatic. I mean, he loves sports so much, and you know, that's what I think of when I think of Austin.
Austin was a hardworking, passionate, dedicated student who I greatly miss.
2 words to describe Austin would be passionate Packer.
Quiet, but funny is how I'll always remember Austin.
Austin was intelligent, but fun-loving. That's how I'll always remember him.
I remember Austin as a sweetheart. He was definitely a wonderful guy, and he was a leader. You know, he was that type of person that everyone wanted to follow, and that's how I remember Austin.